Okay, we're going to be doing chapter 17, Reaction, Reform, and Revolution. Look at that first slide, the title slide, or the beginning, and it looks pretty busy to me now that I look at it again. I made this, I don't know, I made this a while back, but it's very colorful. But anyway, we're going to be talking about what happened after the Napoleonic Wars and so on. So that's where we're headed right now. So right here, got a pretty, I don't know, pretty pixelated looking graphic from where I am. But um, anyway, the Congress of Vienna is what we're going to start talking about. And the Congress of Vienna is going to be attended by a lot of conservatives because that's the way things were moving at that point in time after the Napoleonic Wars, and they want to go back to the way things were in many ways. And that's generally what conservatism is either status quo, staying the same. They're definitely, conservatives generally speaking are not in favor of swift change, right? Quick change. They want to go more slowly. Okay, so we've got Austria, Prussia, Russia, Great Britain, and France. And then we've got the Austrian minister, von Metternich. You can just call him Metternich if you like. All these guys are meeting. Now, they don't like democracy. This was a very conservative thing, too. Okay, democracy, they're just not sure about that because democracy and things like ideas of the French Revolution and the Enlightenment led to maybe, I don't know, look what happened, overthrowing the king in France in particular. You had that being a big problem, and then you have Napoleon coming in and trying to make himself the champion of the people in some ways, but really consolidating power to himself. So these delegates to what we call the Congress of Vienna are going to really be distrustful of democracy, and again, very conservative and wanting to turn things back a little bit to the way it had been before the revolution. So what's the Congress of Vienna besides that? Well, Congress of Vienna is going to be a meeting that's not going to be a few days. It's not going to be something like that. It's going to be held in Austria, again, where you have Metternich being the guy who's the he's the leader. He's the one that's, if you're talking about leading a meeting, he's the one who would have people make motions and all of that type of official stuff. Okay, he was the leader of the meeting, and it's going to be held in Austria. Like I said, from late 1814 to summer of 1815, because what's happening is they're getting ready to defeat Napoleon, right? And Napoleon, remember, he's going to be sent off in exile twice. The last time was in 1815 after the Battle of Waterloo, but they're planning before that, okay? Because you had the Battle of the Nations, and he was exiled, and then he actually came back for 100 days, if you recall. So now these countries are going to come together because, again, they want peace. They want to return to the way things were, restore the international, the national, and whatever kinds of upheaval that had followed Napoleon. They wanted to restore peace. Okay. Now, partially also, they want to create a balance of power, because if everybody's kind of measured in the amount of power they have, it's going to be a lot more difficult for someone to rise up like a Napoleon and try to take over all these other countries. And another part of the Congress of Vienna was, as I said, they're a bunch of conservative leaders. They want to stop the spread of liberal ideas and to stop the liberal revolutions that may or may not come up. Okay. So again, conservatism is going to rule the day in the Congress of Vienna. Now, also keep in mind the word Congress. Also, it can just mean a meeting. It doesn't have to be the legislative body of the United States of America. Congress can be just a meeting, which is what this is. And you're going to see in a few minutes why I'm reminding you that a Congress is a meeting, okay? Because that'll come up again. So who are the important guys that are going to be here? Well, first of all, we've got in Austria the guy we mentioned before. I usually just call him Metternich. Now you notice the von, the V-O-N, that means that someone is of noble lineage, okay, noble birth. Okay, it's a thing common in the Germanic, the Germany and the territories that were going to be making up at that time, the German states, okay? So the von, whenever you see that. Now he again is the Austrian minister, he's the acting president of the Congress of Vienna, thought liberal ideas would lead to a large scale war. I mean, they just finished that. Some historians have remarked over the years that if you wanted to get really technical about it, the Napoleonic Wars could be called World War One, okay, like really the First World War. Now, I don't know, a lot of us disagree with that because the Napoleonic Wars were not going to involve quite the same extent of the world, right? The Napoleonic Wars are going to be, more kind of concentrated in Europe. So I've always thought that was a bit of a reach, but I mean, it was a a definite game changer when you had Napoleon trying to take over the amount of land that he actually tried to take over and for the most part succeeded, except for a couple of notable exceptions, Russia and Great Britain. Okay, so anyway, liberal ideas are in the minds of the Congress of Vienna, of course, very much at the heart of why they need to put some parameters out there for peace. So we look at Metternich and we say, okay, so what are your goals, Metternich, as the president of this meeting? Well, he wanted, of course, as did most of these other guys. I mean, they're meeting there for common interest, but he wanted to contain France, make sure France was surrounded with stronger countries, create that balance of power. Like I said, that would weaken France, but it mainly what it's doing is ensuring that no other country is going to be able to rise up if everyone is sort of equal, right? Balance of power. And then legitimacy was a big deal to the crowned heads, the royalty, because the way you became a king, first of all, throughout the times that we've had kings, especially, if we go back without going all the way back to antiquity and the Greeks and the Romans and stuff, if we go back to medieval times, okay, generally speaking, you're going to become a king because your father was a king or you're the next in line. Even if it's not your father, you're next in line somehow with your family, right? So that was one way you got legitimacy, was through your birth, right? So like look at England today and we have the Queen still on the throne, and you have Prince Charles who actually tested positive for coronavirus recently. Oh dear, it's so many people all around the world are testing positive for that crazy stuff. But Prince Charles, and who was the other one? Who was the somebody else that was close to the Queen? I heard about it the other day, had also tested positive. And she's, what is she, 90, 93? But the Queen of England had apparently not been around the guys. Oh, it's what's his name? The Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. That's who it was. I just remembered. But she hadn't apparently been around them for at least a couple of weeks. So that's good. But anyway, the point is, if the Queen dies, which at some point she will, the legitimacy, the way that that would be established is that it would go to either her son, which probably is not going to happen if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, there's been a lot of water under the bridge there, but we're pretty much all certain that her grandson William is going to end up being the next king of England. Okay, so that comes through the royal lineage. Now, Prince Harry, who recently kind of bowed out of the royal family with his wife, remember Meghan Markle, the see, what are they? They're the Duke and Duchess of not Cambridge, but Sussex rather. But anyway, Prince Harry felt a little bit more, I guess he felt a little bit more empowered to leave the royalty behind because his brother William is next in line as far as that goes. I mean, unless for some strange reason Prince Charles, William, and Harry's father became king. But anyway, for all intents and purposes, let's say William is in line next. So William now has several children. And so in the lineage, that puts Harry way down there. So I think that was one reason that Harry felt more able to lead. Plus, without going too deep into the, why am I doing this with I love the Brits. Remember, I love the royals. Harry's my favorite, but I think Harry was probably just destroyed, as he said before, by his mom, Princess Diana's death, Lady Di, Princess Diana. And he didn't really like what the media did to her. And I think he really wanted to take his family away from that incredibly structured life, right? So I think his wife, Megan, just kind of gave him that extra little bit of support. But anyway, legitimacy. If we're talking about, time of Napoleon and Metternich and so on, then what they're wanting to do in the Congress of Vienna is to restore the families who had been taken over by Napoleon. Okay, so again, Napoleon's going to take over, just for the one example, France. So he's going to set the whole. Remember when the French Revolution has put to death Louis the 16th, the last of the Bourbon rulers at that moment, right? I'm not going to say he's the last of the Bourbon rulers, but let's say at that moment we thought he was, okay? So when he was put to death in 1793, you're going to have then the Republic and all this mess that France is doing, trying to figure out what they want to do. But remember, when Napoleon comes into power, he is going to return the monarchy by making himself emperor. Okay, where did he get his legitimacy? It wasn't from birth. Okay, it was from his might, from his military. Okay, so some of the goals of the Congress of Vienna are to restore the royal families back to the time before Napoleon had come in and destroyed that lineage, basically. So France and Great Britain were liberal leaning, but they had constitutional monarchies at the time. I mean, that's what's going to happen, as we'll see right after Napoleon. After Napoleon's defeated, we're going to see that France is going to be returned to a constitutional monarchy. So that was part of what they were wanting to reinforce and so on. And then Eastern Europe, in particular, is going to be where you have the more conservatives, okay? The more conservative, feelings in that part of the continent. And Prussia, Austria, and Russia are considered Eastern Europe at that time. Anyway, the monarchs are going to have more power. See, if you have a constitutional monarchy, if you remember back when we started out with absolutism, we talked about England tried to be different because England had created constitutionalism for themselves as a way to prevent absolutism. Okay. So we've got France and Great Britain sort of leaning this way, and we've got Prussia, Austria, and Russia kind of leaning this way. Now, look at this. We've got France, Great Britain, Prussia, Austria, and Russia. Okay. Now, keep that in mind. These are the important players as far as the countries. These are the countries that had finally defeated Napoleon, remember, in a coalition. Okay. Except for France. Okay. Great Britain, Prussia, Austria, and Russia. Now, they defeated France. And France, though, in the beginning was not supposed to be involved in the Congress of Vienna. France was supposed to be the subject of the Congress of Vienna. Okay, so keep that in the back of your mind for a minute as well. So a couple of important players here. The one I really want you to know is from Russia. We have the Tsar, Alexander the First. Okay, and then Prussia, I'm not too concerned that you know Karl von Hindenburg. I'm sorry, Hardenberg. I'm sorry, I glanced at that and I immediately thought Hindenburg for a lot of reasons. There's a lot of Hindenburg names that come up in history. But Tsar Alexander the First, you need to know him because of something else that's going to happen. Okay, so keep him in mind that you need to know Tsar Alexander because something is going to happen later that he's going to play an important role in, at least, well, at least sort of play a role in. It has to do with his death and then what happens after his death, okay? Other important guys we have from Great Britain, we have Viscount Castlereagh, who's going to come over. Yeah, I'm not too worried about you knowing much about him. I know he is going to leave at some point the Congress, and he's going to be replaced by Arthur Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington. Okay, so Great Britain had two different guys. I don't want you to sit around and worry too much about memorizing these guys. Okay, just remember the countries, please. Remember the countries specifically for the exam. Remember, I said France was not really meant to be having a role in the Congress of Vienna. France was meant to be punished or, kind of whipped back into shape after Napoleon. Well, it turns out that France sends a diplomat named Talleyrand, okay, and he's able to talk the other players in the Congress of Vienna, the other guys that are there making these decisions, he's able to talk them into having a vote, which is really interesting. Because what's funny about that is that several times during the Congress, Talleyrand is going to be the tie-breaking vote when France was initially, again, meant to be the ones that were being punished. So I just find that interesting. But anyway, there he is, slick talker that he was. What it really comes down to is, what do they decide in this period of time? What are some of the big decisions in the Congress of Vienna? Okay. Well, first of all, France was deprived of all the borders that had been gained by Napoleon, okay, returned back to the original border. Switzerland's declared neutral. Okay. So remember that. I mean, Switzerland's going to be neutral, Congress of Vienna and on. Russia got Finland and this new kingdom of Poland. Austria got Lombardy and Venice in the Italian peninsula. Now, I'm wanting you to understand here. I have an asterisk there that Lombardy and Venice will be important later, as will the relationship that is brought about here when Austria got control of Lombardy and Venice. Okay, those are located in the Italian peninsula. There's no city, or no city, I'm sorry, there's no country of Italy yet until 1866. So Austria has taken over these two parts on the Italian peninsula, and later on in another chapter, we're going to come back and see what happens as a result of that when Italy is attempting to unify and become a country, okay? And it's not going to go well for Austria. That's a preview for another chapter, okay? Now, France is going to be officially restored under the Bourbon king, okay, King Louis the 18th. Now, Louis the 18th is really, he's not, there was no Louis the 17th, okay? Because Louis the 18th took the title 18, okay, Louis the 18th, out of respect for Louis the 16th and Marie Antoinette's son, who died in prison, okay? Louis and Marie Antoinette's son, who died in prison as a result of the French Revolution, could have become king, right? And he would have probably been crowned Louis the 17th. So anyway, Louis the 18th does not, he does not use that number because he reserves that as an honorary, if he had lived, he would have become Louis the 17th. So I'm going to become Louis the 18th. Okay, and you're going to see that happen again with a different situation. Okay, that's not a totally uncommon thing to do. So those are very important decisions of this Congress of Vienna. One reason I mentioned that Congress can just be a meeting, okay, just be another meaning for that word, sort of as a meeting, is I want you to remember that, because sometimes on exams, and hopefully not with you guys, and hopefully not since you're going to have your notes and everything you need, but sometimes people on an exam get the Congress of Vienna confused with the Concert of Europe. Now I can see why. I mean, we've got the, and then we've got a word that starts with a C, Congress or concert, and then of, either Vienna or Europe. Okay, I got you. I mean, I got you. I totally get it. But if you think about it, the Congress was the meeting to come up with those ideas, right? The way, returning France to Bourbon rule, making Switzerland neutral, all that stuff we just mentioned. Now, the Concert of Europe is a result of the meeting. Okay, Concert of Europe comes about because of the Congress of Vienna, if you can remember that. Okay, one was a meeting, and then one was a result. And on the next slide, I'll explain to you exactly what the Concert of Europe was. So again, don't get the Concert of Europe confused with the Congress of Vienna. Congress is a meeting, can be a meeting. A concert, though, if you look at the word concert, it doesn't have to be music. Okay? A concert is a reference also to working together, okay? Just like harmony. Okay, harmony means getting along, not just musical harmony. Concert is working together. Okay, so the Concert of Europe came out of the Congress of Vienna. As the European powers, remember, the crowned heads of Europe were afraid of more revolutions and more uprisings and revolts and so on. You're going to see that a series of alliances are going to be formed, okay, largely by Metternich. Now, again, the purpose of the Congress, the meeting, was to prevent Napoleonic Wars, anything like that, anything that's going to cause one country to come out and try to take over many other countries. Okay, keep a balance of power. So these alliances are going to make sure that the countries knew they would support each other if there were such revolts and uprisings and revolutions that were attempted. Okay, so you're going to have the Concert of Europe being this, first of all, series of alliances where they're working together to keep the peace so they can trust each other, right? Now, from 1818 then to 1822, there's going to be more meetings where eventually they're going to withdraw the troops from France. Because France, remember, had caused this whole darn thing with Napoleon, and so they kept a close eye on France for quite a while. But by 1822, they've agreed to withdraw their troops from France. So the Concert of Europe's pretty much going to be, basically broad cooperation between the great powers of Europe. Okay, cooperation, concert, working together. Okay, now what we see here is that they successfully, by working together with the alliances, are going to prevent large-scale continental war until 1914. That is 99 years from the time of Napoleon's, defeat in 1815 till the outbreak of World War I in 1914. That's pretty successful to me. Now, you do have some people, some historians, who will disagree. And I think in your textbook, even, I think in the next chapter, I think whoever wrote the next chapter after this says something about the Concert of Europe was broken by the Crimean War. And I always shake my head and say, no, okay? No, it was not broken, okay? There was a war. Of course there was a war. There's always going to be wars. But what we're saying here is that from 1815 to 1914, you're not going to have this large-scale Napoleonic-type continental war among all these countries. Okay, you're going to have smaller wars, yes. Okay, like the Crimean War. You're going to have powers involved in it, but it's not by any means anything like Napoleon or World War One. Okay, so I disagree with that. You know, the historians that say the Crimean War broke the concert of Europe, I think they made a mistake with their interpretation of that, because it prevented exactly what it says it prevented: large scale continental war until, 1914. So that's 99 darn years, right? Now, also, you've got to understand these alliances are going to shift over time. But starting in 1815, we're going to have Great Britain, Austria, Prussia, and Russia together in the Quadruple Alliance, okay? Quad. And then you're going to have, remember, France. France is going to be added to the Quintuple Alliance, okay? Now, remember, it's not going to be until 1822 when they really remove all their troops from France. But France had been, I guess, sufficiently chastised by 1818 to allow France to be part of this alliance. And so these two alliances were the cornerstones, foundations, just the bottom primary parts of the concert of Europe. So since we've already talked about that a lot of these leaders are against liberalism, we need to talk about what is liberalism in the 19th century. It's very different than liberalism today, but liberalism, generally speaking, wants change. Okay, liberalism, sometimes today we hear liberal and progressive used synonymously, which is not exactly true, but okay. 19th century liberalism wanted change, okay, wanted to move forward, is what they believe, right? Whereas conservatism wants, as I said before, status quo, or staying the same, or slow change, or sometimes, even going back to old ways. It depends on the conservatism and the movement at the time. Now, look at this, though. Liberalism being more rapid change, you're going to see that the things that they are tackling in the 19th century are very different from things that liberalism is tackling in the 21st century. Okay, today, 21st century, liberalism is going to be discussing things like, hey, abortion. Do women have the right to abortion? And all that type of thing that goes with that. They're going to be discussing things like same-sex marriage. Is that something that we should allow, and so on. And they're types of things that are going to be supported by some liberals today. Okay, so that means a lot of times rapid change for the country, or for the nation, or wherever. So 19th century liberalism, they had some things that at the time were just, controversial too. Just like maybe, depending on where you were and when you were exactly, maybe almost as controversial, if not as controversial as same-sex marriage, abortion, and all the other stuff today that we face. So 19th century liberalism opposes mercantilism. Okay, mercantilism is where the government controls remember, the trade, the import and export. The British were big, there's British mercantilism you can look up if you want to. But remember, the other side of that, the opposite of that, is free trade, laissez-faire, hands off the economy, Adam Smith and all that. Okay, let the market decide, or let the people decide. Okay, that's the opposite of mercantilism, which is one reason that laissez-faire came into being. Individualism, okay, that's a liberal idea, okay, at the time. Limited government, okay, that's a liberal idea at the time, because we're coming out of, say, from medieval times. Many countries had not always absolutist rulers, as we've talked about, but you did have a lot of these nations forming and headed toward absolutism to some degree, where you had a king with at least a lot of power in many places. So limited government was definitely a liberal, and therefore in many places controversial idea. forward thinking, moving on, past the old ways. Private property. Remember the Industrial Revolution? We talked about the enclosure movement. People are starting to put up starting, I believe, in Great Britain, they're putting up fences around their private property because then they're going to be growing crops and they're selling them to people for a profit. Okay. Private property becomes more important during the Industrial Revolution for that and other reasons. Okay. You're going to have some of the leaders who champion private property and some of them who see really no need for such laws. Male suffrage. What? Men getting the right to vote? Are you kidding me? That's liberal back then? That's controversial? Yes, it is. Okay. Men getting the right to vote and legal equality, not based on privilege. Okay. So in other words, generally speaking, even if you had the French Republic, remember the Constitution of 1791, where we had active and passive voters. About half of the men could not vote, okay, based on the amount of taxes they paid in that particular case. But male suffrage, today we're like, well, of course men and women should have the right to vote. It shouldn't be based on privilege, like how much money you have, can you pay to vote, and who is your daddy or whatever. Okay, that was controversial back then. And legal equality going hand in hand with that. We don't want the legal system to treat the rich differently, okay, because of their privilege, because of their upbringing, because of whatever it is, okay? And if I were in class, we could talk a little bit more about that. I could probably get some of you. I don't know. You guys, I think, one of you is the quiet class, so I don't know if you'd be interested in talking too much about it. But I will tell you, the idea that everyone is treated equally in the United States today in the year 2020 is something you could have a really, educated discussion on at some point. But back here, this was very controversial, okay? So some of the 19th century movements that are going to come along can be blamed on, in the in the eyes of the people at the time, liberalism. Okay, liberalism's spreading. It's going to be really hard for them to put down the liberal movement and the liberal and revolutionary fervor that's growing up around Europe. Okay, one of the groups is the Carbonari. Really, think about the Carbonari. Basically, they were a group of secret societies coming under one name. Okay, they're going to be powerful in Italy and a couple other places, but Italy's the only one you need to know about. They're anti-clerical, which means anti-church. They are targeted by the conservatives. Therefore, they were secret, as it says above, secret societies. They didn't want to, to be hunted down by their enemies, political enemies, right? So they're going to favor constitutional and representative governments. Remember, that's going to mean smaller government, limited government. Okay, that is a liberal tenet. They're also going to play a role that's pretty powerful in the eventual unification of Italy, which will happen in 1866, that we will talk about in, was it the next chapter? Yeah, the next chapter, right after your exam, which ends with this chapter that we are on right now, Reaction, Reform, and Revolution. Okay, now the Carbonari, they're going to participate in another revolution that came about in 1830. There's going to be revolutions again in 1830 and 1848. But in 1830, you're going to see these guys taking part in the revolution of 1830, and you're going to see the liberal policy of King Louis Philippe of France being put into place, okay? I feel like I say okay all the time, you guys. Just used to talking in front of you, not without you. Then again, it's possible that I say okay all the time in class. I don't know. Anyway, so right here, we have just a picture of what we're going to talk about next, which is the Decembrist Revolt. Now, this is going to happen in Russia, and this is something else that the liberals were considered to be responsible for, Okay, because remember, they wanted to stop these revolutions and revolts and uprisings and all of that. Well, this is definitely an uprising and a revolt. Okay, wasn't quite a revolution, because a revolution implies that you have successfully made long-term, long-lasting change, right? Revolution, the word revolution, change. So the revolt, to me, the way I somehow, for some reason, at some point in my life started remembering it, was a revolution. Again, just what I said: change, long-lasting change, important change, big change, watershed moment, or whatever. But a revolt is almost, if you look at the words, it's almost like a revolution cut short. Does that make sense? Revolt versus revolution. I don't know if that'll help you, but that always has helped me remember. So what is the Decembrist revolt? Well, again, like I said, produced by liberalism. And there's where I told you needed to know Tsar Alexander. He was at the Congress of Vienna, and I told you he would be important. Now, what's important, I kind of gave you a hint back there, or may have even said it specifically clearly, that it's his death that's going to lead to something really big in Russia. Okay? Now, when Alexander dies, he has no son, he has no heir to the throne, but he does have two brothers. Okay, Constantine, who's next in line for the throne. Okay, Constantine, as far as the lineage goes, he's the one that people thought was going to be next, once Alexander died. Now, Constantine was really popular with the Russians. Okay, why? Because he had liberal ideas. He embraced the Enlightenment ideas. Remember, liberal leanings in the 19th century and Enlightenment ideas, they're going to go hand in hand. And also, they're going to generally help the masses, right? The people, instead of the upper classes. So a lot of people felt, Constantine is going to become the next czar. So Constantine is going to be out for the people. And a lot of people believe that he would support a limited government. In other words, cutting out his own power and having, support for a constitutional monarchy that would cut his power. Now, truth is, a lot of the people in Russia really didn't like Alexander I because he was quite oppressive, he was quite controlling, he was quite scared of revolts and revolutions in Russia. Okay? So you had Constantine, and then you had Nicholas. Now, here's the thing, okay? You got Nicholas, the youngest of the three brothers, and Nicholas was not aware that he was going to become czar upon Alexander's death. You see, what had happened was Constantine had married a commoner. He had married, I believe, a Polish girl who was a commoner, and so therefore he had stepped down from the line of succession. So, after Alexander died, the people were like, yay, Constantine. Constantine's like, no, 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 it's not me. It's my brother Nicholas. Nicholas is like, wait a minute. Aren't you next in line? I'll go ahead and tell you a little bit about what was going on there. See, what happened is, and like I said, Constantine was in line for the throne, but he married someone, who wasn't royal. So the problem was that when his older brother, the Tsar Alexander, took the succession away from Constantine as Constantine gave it up, he didn't really tell anybody. Okay, so it was only found out after he died. Now, there was a lot of question because Alexander had written it out, and he had written that his younger brother Nicholas was now next in line. But a lot of people really didn't want Nicholas. Like I said, they wanted Constantine. They thought he would be a lot better and a lot easier on them. And the liberals really, really didn't like Nicholas. They thought he would be just like Alexander. So a lot of people thought that Nicholas had kind of stolen the throne from Constantine. So this is where we have these guys wanting to change the government of Russia. Okay. Now you're going to have the idea, again, as I said, of a constitutional monarchy. And Nicholas had not really expressed any, I guess, he hadn't expressed any positivity toward having a smaller government. Okay. And, again, he just wasn't the kind of guy that the people liked. So we have all that going on, and it's confusing. Okay. So people didn't know this. Nicholas didn't know this. And what we have to wait for is, how is all of this going to blow up? I mean, is Constantine going to be drafted? Is Nicholas going to be, is he going to run away? Well, that's where, this whole thing gets really interesting, because there's a lot of things going on that neither Constantine or Nicholas have control over. Go back a little bit and you'll see that some of those secret societies, secret liberal societies, had formed during Alexander the First reign, because again, like I said, he was oppressive, repressive. He just wasn't open to a lot of the new ideas. Okay. So the Napoleonic Wars is one reason that Russians opposed the monarchy at that time. The liberals, and so on were starting to move away from that idea. Now, the French peasants were in the military and their treatment was poor. So they're going to want a change. They're going to want someone in a leadership position like a czar who is going to actually take their needs into consideration, right? We have military officers who have been traveling and they've been exposed to these new Enlightenment liberal ideas, and they had seen and heard about revolutions over in other countries. So there's a lot going on here, right? Now, there's going to be two groups that are going to play a role to some extent in the Decembrist revolt, and I'm going to talk about them on the next two slides and explain how they're slightly different from each other. Okay, look at that. I do say okay all the time. So the two societies, first of all, we're going to talk about the Northern Society that formed in St. Petersburg. Okay, the Northern Society, this is going to be a group of guys, with the liberal ideas. And again, some of them are led by the men from the military, some of the high-ranking officers and so on. But the Northern Society, they wanted a federation of states, okay? They wanted a federation of states, which took the power out to the people, okay? As opposed to having a powerful czar, which would be much more centralized power, right? The government would have more authority with the czar. They want to give the czar limited power. And then we have provincial government, basically, okay? Local government would be able to make more of the rules. And that means that the people would have more of a voice. Now, the Northern Society wanted to abolish serfdom. Okay, this is 1825. Serfdom has been gone throughout much of Europe for quite a while, but Russia, it's still going to be around after this for quite a while longer. But the problem is the serfs, remember, they were bound to the land. They couldn't be sold from their land. They were very much like slaves, but they did have rights back in medieval times, during feudalism. So they wanted to abolish serfdom, but they didn't want to prepare anything. They didn't want to provide anything. They didn't want to, give the serfs any way to take care of themselves and provide for their families. So that's pretty short-sighted as far as that goes. Okay, so the Southern Society is from Kiev, and they wanted a representative Republican government, and in an opposite manner, they wanted it to be highly centralized, right? Now, that meant, instead of a federation of states, they wanted it to be national, and that meant that it would have someone who was more powerful, okay, in a, or at least a group that was more powerful, centralized. So they still wanted to abolish serfdom, but they wanted to give the serfs land. These guys were more radical because instead of just saying, well, we're going to take some of the czar's power, they're just like, well, let's just kill the czar. We don't need the czar anymore. So, in spite of everything, one thing the Northern Southern societies agreed on was change. So, once Alexander the First died, there were two crises. Okay, we already talked about the dynastic crisis, the whole thing. He dies without an heir, and Constantine, Nicholas, and all that stuff, right? So, now we're going to have a military crisis. Now, what we saw here was that December 14th of 1825, the military was supposed to swear allegiance to the new czar, Nicholas the First, right? So, the ceremony was going to be held in the Senate Square outside the Winter Palace. It was going to be great and so on. But you're going to have some of the officers really starting a mutiny, right, within their own men. And you're going to see a few thousand men, between 2,000 and 3,000 men, are going to basically refuse to swear allegiance to Nicholas. Okay? Now, Nicholas was at that moment thinking, well, maybe we better try to talk to these guys. Well, that didn't really work. So finally, Nicholas knew he had to take control. Now, what we see is, as I said before, Nicholas had been thought by the people to be a guy who would be just like Alexander the First. He would be oppressive and all that. Well, we don't know what kind of guy he would have been, because due to this Decembrist revolt, Nicholas had to give the order to open fire, okay? And the Tsar was able, of course, to put down this revolt. Now, again, this is a mess as far as that goes. I mean, it's going to be a conflict between the military liberals, the conservative, definitely with Nicholas, very conservative czar. And you're going to see that the Russian people are going to be changed forever in this way. Nicholas himself is going to be changed forever because of this, because for the rest of his life, he's going to be afraid that there's going to be another revolt. And so he did clamp down on the people. Okay? So, as I said, who knows? He might have not been that guy if this had not happened. This slide number 23, that's sort of what I said. He ordered the firing and so on. And you're going to have, I don't remember the exact number. I know it's 60 something, I believe. But anyway, you're going to have some of the guys who had plotted against Nicholas who were going to be executed. Some of them are sent off to Siberia. That's kind of an old joke. You don't want to be sent to Siberia. It's like the worst place in the world. Well, the thing was, the guys who were going to be sent off to Siberia, we end up with a new idiom or a new slang term coming into Russian at that time. You hear about Decembrist wives. So what happened was the men who were exiled, well, they had no choice, but their wives had a choice. Did the wives have to go with their husbands to Siberia? I mean, who's going to want to go to Siberia? So we start to see that several of these women did indeed follow their husbands into exile. Now, what this basically was what the way that this became, like I said, an idiom or a slang word at the time, or slang, for a very loyal wife, was because they had a choice. Okay, you're going to have over 100 men who were convicted, but there were only about 20 something who were married. All right, so the ones that follow their husbands over to Siberia, it's a show of loyalty, for heaven's sake, because again, this is going to be something really Uh, this is gonna be something really hard on the women. Okay, so is this a sign of great loyalty? Absolutely. Is it a sign of love? I'm sure it is. Is it a sign of, I don't know, being kind of maybe a little bit blinded by love and whatever? Because my goodness, they're in Siberia, and you had not just the fact of it being cold and dark and whatever. These guys are going to be sentenced not to just go live there, but they're going to be sentenced to 30 years of hard labor in the mines. Holy cow. Okay, I probably say that a lot too, but keeps me from saying other stuff that I shouldn't say. Now, again, the thing is, the Decembrist wives, they were generally pretty young, and it's kind of surprising that they would leave behind their lives, right? But they were not forced to do this. Some of them are going to leave behind their children. You're going to have women who were incredibly privileged. Okay. One of them is going to sign a document with the czar that renounced all of her titles because she was actually a princess, right? Now, there's going to be a story, I guess, a legend, a story. We don't know how much this is true, but supposedly, I mean, the one of the women wrote in a letter to her husband, she said, "Whatever is your fate, I will share in it." Yikes. Okay. So there's only about 11 of these women who go along over there with their husbands. And again, they are going to be in Russia, a new ideal, right? The actual, I guess, epitome of the perfect love that a wife could have for her husband. And I'm assuming it would work both ways, hopefully, but unconditional love, unconditional devotion. Okay. So another thing that makes that Decembrist revolt very interesting because of those women who did actually go along with their husbands. I basically have already said pretty much what's on, what is this one, slide number 24. The rebels were liberals, right? Who were afraid that Nicholas was going to be way conservative. And so Nicholas, as a result of this, actually became way conservative, even if he wasn't before. Again, so basically, he's going to put out some new laws, regulations, and so on, controls to prevent spread of the liberalism in Russia. So he will indeed become that despot that the people believed he would. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy, really. So we need to go over to England for a moment and talk about what's going on over there with reaction and reforms and stuff in the liberal world. What we see is England becomes more conservative. Both the Tories and the Whigs are going to become more conservative. The government's going to completely oppose liberalism. And Great Britain's going to pull back from the Quintuple Alliance, okay? So the Corn Laws, now this is going to be a really important thing because it's important in British mercantilism. Remember, where the government's going to control the importing and exporting and prices and all sorts of things. But the Corn Laws are going to be put in place 1815 until they're repealed in 1846. Okay? Now, here's the thing. The Corn Laws are not going to mean what you think they mean. And what they're actually talking about, I'll go into on not the next slide, but the number 27, the one after that. But I do want to show you a graphic that I found at some point that kind of shows, well, I love to find primary sources. I love to find pictures or, pictures of articles and things like that from the Times. So that's what's going to be on the next slide. So again, we've got this, this is from something that was written back then, and you can just kind of look at it. And it's talking about, repealers say the corn law is a tax on bread and go on and on and on. Bread, not against, but for the poor. And you can read that yourself. But you can look at it a little bit more after we've talked about it, or if you've already read about the corn laws, you can look at it and understand the point that they're trying to make here. Because what's going on is you're going to see both sides. Some are going to support the corn laws, some are going to, be totally against the corn laws, and so they're going to each put out their own kind of opinions about what it is. Now they also sometimes they call it, well, the proof. We have the supposed advantages, and then we have the real results if we repeal them, and then we've got the proof. Well, let me just tell you what happened. First of all, these are import tariffs to protect the British farmers. Here's the way they were supposed to be protecting the British farmers. See, corn, in this sense, right, it's going to be the grain, the highest grain crop at the time. So it wasn't maize, yellow corn that we're used to. We talk about corn on the cob. It's not that. It was the grain at the time, the highest, grain at the time. So in England, it was wheat. So the import tariffs basically were saying, okay, if we actually put a tariff on any wheat coming into Great Britain, it will protect our farmers. Okay, so we're going to put this tariff on any corn, well, again, wheat at the time, that's coming into England. The purpose was to help the grain prices stay higher for things that were coming into England. Therefore, people in England would purchase from local, English farmers. See, so that was the idea. And this is, again, this is a part of British mercantilism. So the intention is to protect the English farmers from the foreign imports of grain, outselling them and all of that. But it's not going to work out really the way it was supposed to. Because what's happening is you're going to see, as the corn laws, the tariffs and the restrictions that were put on particularly wheat at the time, you're going to see that as the tariffs were, as the imports were coming in from other countries, you had these extraordinarily high prices on the grain. Okay, so let's say, I'm just going to make up wild numbers because I have no idea how much any of this cost at that time. But let's just say that you were able to charge, if you were paying the tariffs or whatever, you were charging a pretty high price. You were charging, say, 70 cents a pound or something. So before this, your local, your Englishman, they had been charging, say, 30 cents a pound. Well, the imports that are coming in, they're charging 70 cents and I'm charging 30 cents. I'm like, you know what? They're getting away with charging 70 cents. And if I raise my prices from 30 cents a pound, remember, I'm just making up stuff here, but same idea. If I raise my price from 30 cents a pound to 50 cents a pound, I'm still going to get their business and I'm going to make more money. So you know what happened was it ended up hurting the industrialists. It ended up hurting the people in the cities because the food prices went up extraordinarily during that time. And so it made it difficult. People were losing their jobs. I mean, it was hurting. It was helping the farmers. Heck yeah, it was helping the British farmers. But it was hurting the bigger classes at the time, the growing classes of industrial workers and the industrialists and the merchants and the people who couldn't afford to pay their workers because it was so impossible to get a decent price for the grain at the time. Corn Pardon laws are going to be repealed by a guy you've heard of before, Robert Peel, the guy who started the first London Metropolitan Police Force, the Peelers at the beginning, and then became the Bobbies. And it's because, of the reason that I just mentioned on the last slide. And you're going to see that other things are going on in England at the same time, as far as reaction and reform movements. We have the Reform Bill of 1832. Now, this one was supposed to make it easier for the liberals. So, if we do what the liberals want, then they won't revolt against us. So in reality, the ways that they're trying to help the liberals be more satisfied with whatever's going on doesn't really work. I mean, they're gonna lessen land requirements for voting. It's a liberal idea, letting more men vote, redistribute parliament seats. But in the end, it doesn't really help the working class, and that's why the Reform Bill in 1832 didn't really make any changes for the people who needed them. I mentioned earlier that in 1830, we're going to have another revolutionary time. We're going to have another French Revolution, not quite as large, right? We're going to mark the shift from one constitutional monarchy, which in this point was the Bourbon Restoration under Louis XVIII, not nearly as powerful as the absolutist who had preceded him. And, even Louis XVI had attempted to be an absolutist, but we know how that went. So we're going to go from the Bourbon Restoration to the July monarchy. Now, what's going to happen here is we have the Bourbon king, Charles X, on the throne. And he does not like having a constitutional monarchy. He wants to be, oh my goodness, guess what? A literal absolutist. He wants to go way back and do a Louis XIV on France. Well, that would entail undoing liberal reforms. I'm sorry, my dog is not wanting me to do this right now. Sorry on that last slide. That is my almost 16-year-old little Shih Tzu, and she does not like it when I do stuff that does not involve her for hours at a time. She does like me being home a lot. She kind of makes every step I do, but I think I had been sitting here narrating stuff for way too long, and she's like, look, pay attention to me. And she actually wanted some cream cheese. Shh, don't tell anybody I feed my dog cream cheese. Y'all keep it between us, right? All right, so 1830. So we had Charles X, and he wants to go back and be an absolutist, right? So Charles X is going to find that the liberals are going to win a lot of elections in 1830 under the constitutional monarchy, which he wants to get rid of. So Charles and his ministers did something that happens quite frequently. I mean, we saw the Directory do that with Napoleon. We're going to see Charles X and his ministers do that here. We're going to see the Nazis do that in 1933. We're going to see these guys refusing to accept the results of an election. So then we have the four ordinances. You don't really need to know that particularly much about that, but this is going to be basically the royal coup, and Charles is going to fail. He's going to be forced to abdicate the throne. Now he's going to be replaced by Louis Philippe, and this is where the Bourbon dynasty ends. Okay, remember the Bourbon dynasty, except for the French Republic and Napoleon and all that stuff, had started back at the beginning of our class with Henry IV. Okay, first Bourbon king, and you're going to have Louis Philippe being the first of the Orleans family or the Orleans dynasty. So Charles X was the last of the Bourbons. Louis Philippe, he's sometimes called the July monarch, or his regime is called July monarchy, or even the bourgeoisie monarchy. Now here's the thing. Okay, we're going to see the tricolor flag of revolution replacing the old Bourbon flag. As remember, Charles X has been forced out, the last Bourbon there. And so you're going to see that, again, this is a time of revolution. The people are going to pick this guy because they think that he's going to go along with the strong constitutional monarchy. Now, they force him to take a concession. Now, I have to remember, I have to admit that I can remember when I first read about this, whenever that was, a long time ago, I read about the July monarchy, and I remember thinking, what does it mean that he had to take the title King of the French, not King of France? Well, that's a really important distinction that I give sometimes in my History 104 classes when we talk about, going way back to the 500s AD, the time of Clovis or something. But okay, the idea was if you were king of France, the idea, at least implied by that in medieval times, you were king of a territory, okay, and what became a nation in this case. And so basically, the land was yours. You're the king of the land. This is my land. All of you are living on my land, which is one reason that private property wasn't seen as that important by a lot of these king types, right? So, King of the French was the first thing, that they changed here as a knock, kind of knocking him down, as my mom would say, a peg or two, from King of France to King of the French. Okay, so in other words, he is a Frenchman, he is king over the French people, but not the land. That's a distinction that's important, especially if you know the history, where again the king, well, this is my land, I'm letting you all live here on it, especially during feudal times. Now, again, what they wanted with Louis Philippe was they wanted him to be a guy that is going to go along with the liberal reforms. And so one thing that happens here is the Constitution is going to be kind of reframed in a revolutionary manner. So Louis Philippe is going to have, well, he's going to be told, for one thing, but he's going to go along with the idea that the Constitution is a right of the people, not just something that the monarch gives you because you live in his land or whatever. Okay, he gets rid of censorship and all of this stuff. Okay, what's wrong with that? Sounds like a good start, right? So Louis Philippe is going to be around for quite a long time. That was the revolution of 1830. So my, how things may change in 18 years. We have a revolution in 1848 again. Now there's a French Revolution again. And remember, there's the French Revolution from 1789 to 1800-ish. 1799, depends on if you want to count Napoleon taking over 1799 or not. But anyway, you got 1848 revolution. It's not just happening there. There's going to be revolutions in other places. Like I said before, Austria is one of them. That's going to be a really important one to know about. So the people are dissatisfied with Louis Philippe. Okay, he's not done what they wanted him to do exactly, and now they're done with him. So they wanted universal suffrage for the men. Okay, all men are allowed to vote, and less power for the king. Well, I mean, that was what they signed up for in the first place, right? Less power for the king, more revolution, vive la revolution, right? Again. Well, in 1848, they're reiterating this. Okay, we don't like you anymore, Louis Philippe, we're done. We want to talk to you about extending the right to vote to all Frenchmen. And Louis Philippe makes a really bad mistake because he says, no, I am not going to speak with you about that. Not the smartest thing you've ever done, Louis Philippe. Parisian riot, horrible thing. We end up with Louis Philippe having to abdicate the throne. Okay, now that's where our test is going to end. And then when we start our next material, we're going to talk about a little bit more of the fallout from the 1848 revolution and revolutions. Okay, so for now, you have to look back at your checklist and remember your test exam number, 2, gosh, where did this whole semester is such a like a surreal thing, isn't it? But you're going to have the French Revolution, Industrial Revolution, and then Reaction, Reform, and Revolution. All three of them have the word revolution in them. So please be studying. Please, I encourage you to use your PowerPoints and any notes that you've taken from the lectures, anything that you want, except for Google. I don't want you Googling stuff on the exam. But again, look at your checklist and please, as always, contact me as soon as you can through email if you have any questions, any problems, anything I can do for you to help us get through this. I say us, I mean to help you get through this, because that's what I'm doing. Okay, I'm trying to help you guys um, understand all this stuff the best way I can in this format. And if you have any suggestions, please offer them up. I will be more than happy to consider them. If I have the technology to be able to do some of the things. I've had a suggestion from someone who had said, well, it would help if I could stand up and lecture and in front of the PowerPoint. And I was like, well, I don't think that would work because I don't have the technology at home to do all that. And I don't have access to the technology out at the college because, pandemic. So anything though that you think would help, please let me know. Please study, please keep in contact with me, and I will see you guys on the other side of exam 2.